October 1944. The Western Allies have punched through France and Belgium. The Nazi regime is reeling, but now standing between the US Army and the German heartland is the ancient, defiant city of Aachen, once home to Charlemagne, now twisted by war and ideology into a fortress of Hitler's Reich. This is not just another battle. This is a siege, a symbol, a brutal preview of what lies ahead in the drive to Berlin. Welcome back to the History Front. Today, we cover the Battle of Aachen, the first German city to fall into Allied hands in World War II, and one of the fiercest urban battles the US Army had ever faced. After the success of the Normandy landings in June 1944 and the breakout at Saint-Lay, Allied forces advanced rapidly through France and Belgium. The German army was in retreat, but as September came to a close, the Allied advance began to stall. Logistics were stretched thin. Fuel shortages became critical. The dream of ending the war by Christmas began to fade. The Allies had now reached the western border of Germany, the Siegfried Line, known to the Germans as the West Wall. It was a 390-mile-long defensive belt of concrete bunkers, anti-tank obstacles, minefields, and fortified towns. And one of those towns was Aachen. Aachen was more than a dot on the map. It was one of Germany's oldest cities. It had been Charlemagne's capital, his imperial seat. Symbolically, it represented the birth of the Holy Roman Empire, and by extension, the myth of German destiny. For Adolf Hitler, it was unthinkable to surrender Aachen without a fight. Though most civilians had fled, Hitler ordered all evacuations stopped. Aachen was declared a fortress city. German troops were ordered to hold it at all costs. No retreat, no surrender. He made it clear that losing Aachen would be seen as treason. To the Americans, however, Aachen was the key to unlocking the German heartland. If they could seize the city, they'd have a breach in the Siegfried Line, a psychological victory, and a base to push further into Germany. Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, commanding the US First Army, initially hoped the city would fall with limited resistance, but Hitler's orders had sealed Aachen's fate. By early October, American forces had surrounded the city on three sides. To the north and south, the 7th and the 19th Corps maneuvered to cut off German reinforcements. Within the city, roughly 5,000 German soldiers prepared for a siege, including elements of the 246th Volksgrenadier Division and SS reinforcements. Colonel Gerhard Wilk was placed in command. On October 8th, the Americans attacked Crucifix Hill, a key German position just east of Aachen. The fighting was fierce. German bunkers and pillboxes raked American infantry with machine gun fire. Engineers crawled through minefields to plant charges on the bunkers. In one heroic action, Staff Sergeant Sherwood Hallman destroyed a heavily fortified pillbox single-handedly, sacrificing his life in the process. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. With Crucifix Hill taken, the route into Aachen opened up, but instead of surrendering, the Germans dug in deeper. On October 11th, the Americans unleashed a massive bombardment. Over 5,000 artillery shells and two major airstrikes dropped more than 60 tons of bombs on the city. Historic buildings were reduced to rubble. Narrow streets became debris-filled trenches. But instead of weakening the Germans, the destruction made the city even harder to capture. German troops used the ruins to their advantage. Rubble provided cover. Collapsed buildings formed barricades. Cellars and tunnels allowed them to move unseen. The Americans would not be fighting on streets. They would be fighting through buildings, stairwells, and basements. On October 13th, the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, entered Aachen. Street fighting began in earnest. The city's medieval layout, with its narrow alleyways and tight corners, made tanks nearly useless. The infantry had to go house by house, room by room. Bazookas were used to blast holes through walls so troops could clear multiple buildings without stepping outside. Flammethrowers and grenades became standard tools of survival. Snipers lurked in windows and towers. Panzer Force teams waited in ambush. Booby traps were everywhere. One American soldier described the experience as fighting phantoms in a stone maze. The enemy wasn't always visible, but the danger never stopped. American progress was slow, measured in yards, not miles. Clearing a single block could take an entire day. Sometimes, even after a building was secured, German troops would re-enter it through underground passages and force the Americans to retake it again. The German defenders were running low on supplies, but they continued to resist. Hitler sent messages praising their bravery and encouraging them to die rather than surrender. Yet the situation was hopeless. The Luftwaffe was unable to help. Artillery was limited, and the Allies controlled the skies. Meanwhile, US reinforcements pushed deeper into the city. The 26th Infantry Regiment led the advance from the northeast. Tanks from the 745th Tank Battalion supported where they could, but the rubble-strewn streets made movement difficult and dangerous. Engineers and infantry had to improvise constantly. By October 17th, American troops had cut the city in half. German morale was beginning to crack. Still, Colonel Wilk held out, claiming he would not surrender without a direct order from Hitler, which, of course, would never come. American commanders knew a cornered enemy could still inflict heavy casualties. Rather than rush the final assault, they tightened the noose. Artillery continued pounding the last strong points. House by house, block by block, the Americans closed in. On October 21st, after 19 days of intense fighting, Colonel Wilk finally surrendered. He admitted later that he had done so only to avoid further loss of life among his men. With his surrender, the Battle of Aachen ended. The victory came at a high price. American casualties numbered around 5,000 killed, wounded, or missing. German losses were similar, with thousands killed and over 5,000 taken prisoner. The city itself was devastated. Of Aachen's 13,000 buildings, more than 10,000 were damaged or destroyed. Fires smoldered 4 days, but the psychological impact was enormous. Aachen was the first German city captured by the Allies. It shattered the illusion of Nazi invincibility. German civilians, now for the first time under Allied occupation, saw with their own eyes that defeat was coming. Propaganda papers in Berlin tried to minimize the loss, but the truth was out. The Siegfried Line had been breached. The Allies were inside the Reich. For American troops, Aachen was a brutal lesson in urban warfare. They had trained for open field battles and mechanized movements, but city fighting was a different beast. At Aachen, they adapted. They learned how to clear bunkers, breach buildings, and coordinate infantry with armor in tight, unpredictable environments, and they would need those lessons. Ahead lay even worse: the Hergen Forest, the Ardennes, and the final push into the heart of Nazi Germany. Colonel Wilk later called the defense of Aachen a tragedy of orders. Thousands died to defend a city that had no chance of being held. He knew it, his men knew it, but the Nazi regime demanded symbolic victories, no matter the cost. Today, Aachen has been rebuilt, its cathedral restored, its people moved on, but the battle remains a defining moment not only for World War II, but for the future of modern warfare. The Battle of Aachen was more than a tactical victory. It was a message to the world, to the Germans, and to the soldiers fighting through the ruins. The war had entered a new phase. The Reich was bleeding, and it would only get worse. Thanks for watching this episode of the History Front. If you found this story compelling, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. What do you think Aachen tells us about the future of urban warfare? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and keep pushing through history.